Welcome to another episode of Wheel of Horror, the podcast where two best friends spin a wheel once a week. It chooses the horror movie and they discuss it. Today we're talking about 1977's Martin, which was directed by George A. Romero. I'm your co-host Alec, and filling in for Erik this week is the one, the only Joe Testa.
Thank you very much.
Welcome back, and I know we were supposed to do Poltergeist 2 this week. Erik had something come up, so we're swapping in Martin for this week, and then we're jumping to Poltergeist next week. So, sorry if anybody was like, what the fuck? I thought Poltergeist was this week.
Those hardcore Poltergeist 2 fans are going to come for you.
Exactly. Seriously. I mean, there are some movies we've done where I'm like, oh, I bet nobody cares about this one. And it gets the most comments, the most downloads. And I'm like, okay, I know nothing.
And those people are going to be like, what the hell are you guys talking about? Martin? What the hell's that?
I hope that we release this and it gets so much attention because, you were telling me, and I didn't really look too much into it, but you said this is very hard to come by, right?
Yeah, so I saw this movie much like I saw The Funhouse in the early days of Netflix. I got this by disc in the mail, and then it just seemed to go out of print. You could only find this on used DVDs. That's what I lent you because luckily it's just been re-released on 4K Ultra HD, but only overseas in Europe. So I had to have this thing imported and you can't rent it on Vudu or Movies Anywhere, and you can't get it from any American Blu-ray distributor. So yeah, this is kind of a hard movie to track down, but I saw today it's actually available on YouTube. So if anyone wants to check it out for free, it is, as of this recording, available on YouTube. As far as I know, the issues with the availability of this movie are from the producer. I don't know all the details, but the producer, Richard Rubenstein, he produced this. He also produced Dawn of the Dead. Both of those movies are currently unavailable in the US because of some kind of dispute with this producer. I'm not really sure why, but apparently he's asking for a lot of money to license these movies. But for whatever reason, he is allowing it to be put on disc in Europe. So
yeah, it's so weird. Yeah, I was going to ask you, I guess we could just get into it now. Why are every one of George A. Romero, well, not every one of them, but a lot of George A. Romero's movies they're so good, but then literally all of the money goes to somebody else or you can't find it anywhere. It's just what the hell happened to him? How could he not get a distributor or whatever?
Yeah, he definitely had some rotten luck with Night of the Living Dead, and listeners can go listen to that episode way back when. But yeah, I'm not really sure what the behind the scenes situation is with this movie, and especially Dawn of the Dead, because that's one of the most famous horror movies of the 1970s, and you can't just get that Blu-ray, you can get a used copy, or you can do what I did and have one imported. But yeah, it's really a shame that these movies aren't more accessible.
Yeah, it's so weird. I mean, yeah, the DVD that you lent me, that was great, but even that didn't even have subtitles on it. It was very bare for what it had. I don't know. If you're if you're a deaf person, you're well, you're never going to see this movie, basically. I don't know. There's just a couple things I just found very, I don't know, interesting that we couldn't find it, or there was no behind the scenes footage or anything like that on the DVD. Then I found out this movie was apparently almost 3 hours long. So I was going to ask you, the 4K version that you got, does it have any of that?
So it has some really good special features. It has interviews with the cast and crew, and they do talk about this extended cut that George Romero, that was his version of the movie, but apparently it was just lost. And in the special features on the disc, they mention how they tried to find it for this release, but it's either gone for good or, as of this recording, just hasn't been found.
Well, it's still cool because I definitely want to know more, because I feel the ending just sneaks up on you and you're like, wait, what? I thought there was going to be a little bit more before that. But first off, just want to say, I really enjoyed this, man. Thank you so much for recommending it. It was so interesting. But one thing I did want to ask you, because, when we'd hung out last week or whatever, you said it's an experimental film. I didn't really think it was that experimental, maybe for the 70s, but I wanted to ask you what you meant by that.
Yeah, maybe that wasn't the word I should have used. Maybe just comparing it to some of his other movies or comparing it to similar movies like I don't know what you would compare this to. Maybe The Hills Have Eyes or the early Wes Craven movies. This seems a little bit more artsy, is maybe the word I'm searching for. This movie is kind of
Mm.
an interesting blend of genres. It's kind of 70s exploitation and gothic horror, which are like two of my favorite subgenres. And that's probably
Mm.
why I like this movie so much. But one of my favorite elements about this movie are the black and white scenes. There's
Right.
Martin before he attacks these women to drink their blood because he believes he's a vampire. He imagines how the scenario is going to go, and it's a very kind of gothic, romantic version. It's almost like a Universal Studios monster movie. It's a very seductive encounter, and
Mm.
then we see it in real life. It's very messy and awkward and more like an exploitation movie. I just think that's all really, really interesting.
Okay. Yeah, because like stylized, it would go to black and white for the flashbacks or whatever that those sequences are. But I definitely got the feeling of the old vampire films, especially when he's like hunting down his grandfather in that one scene where like the fog's
Mhm.
there and he's like slowly and then he disappears. So yeah, I guess really quick, just give a little bit of an overview for people that haven't seen this movie because apparently it's pretty hard to see. But basically, it's about a guy named Martin, and he looks like he's probably 18, but he actually ends up being 84, or at least tells everybody that. He's going to live with his grandfather and his cousin because they think he's a vampire. So I'm a little confused on why he goes there. But anyways, so he's kind of a serial killer because he just sneaks around killing people, women typically, and he drinks their blood because he thinks he's a vampire. Yet nothing affects him. From our understanding of vampires, like garlic crosses sun doesn't do anything to him. So you're like, okay, is he a vampire? And yeah, his grandfather basically enlists the church, and we just kind of follow Martin's day to day existence. So I don't know. I mean, that's kind of the broad overview, and we'll obviously get to all the major plot points and all that. But did I miss anything? Did I screw that up, Joe? Because I know you definitely know way more than I do.
No, that's about right. I mean, it's a character study, and I think that people going into this movie that are maybe expecting something more like Night of the Living Dead or something as fun as Dawn of the Dead or Creepshow. We've talked about a lot of Romero
I
over the
know.
years now, which is kind of cool. I think this one is a lot different. It's much more of a kind of a slow, kind of sad character study.
Well, I wanted to ask you the thing that I really got from this, the two things that flagged for me were Dexter for a
Mm,
few reasons. Dexter, American Psycho, but then also Clockwork Orange. You've seen that movie, right?
sure.
I just got that feeling of just like the home invasion and like I don't know, just even though Martin seemed like he like didn't want to be doing it, he wasn't doing it because he like enjoyed it, but the way that he went about it was similar to the way of Alex DeLarge or whatever from Clockwork Orange.
Yeah, no, I could definitely understand that. And one that came to mind when I was watching it this time was Taxi Driver.
Mm.
I think they're both just these stories about these really sad, lonely, kind of sick young men that live in this really oppressive environment. In Taxi Driver, it's New York, and in here it's just outside Pittsburgh. And I really love movies that just kind of capture a time and a place.
Hmm.
Like no movie does that better than Taxi Driver, but this area that Martin is in, it just has so much character.
Yeah, and it's such like a shift from the beginning where he's like on a train, comes into like the kind of industrial part of Pittsburgh, and then by the end of it, he's like in the suburbs kind of, but he keeps going back to the city and everything like that. But you're right, the setting is such a presence in the film. But I want to know then, so maybe because I've only seen it once, I saw it yesterday for the first time, so I'm still kind of digesting it. But is it supposed to make us feel like the audience isn't aware is Martin actually a vampire or is he not? Is it all in his head or like so is that what we're trying to figure out or do you think there's a definitive answer?
So you're asking, is this like a Blade Runner situation? Is Deckard a replicant? Is he not? You
Yeah.
know, I think that's something cool about this movie, that it is left ambiguous, and you could ask yourself that question. I never really took it that way. I just always assumed Martin is the result of really horrible upbringing. You know,
Mm.
he's just had this idea pounded into his head since he was probably a baby, and this is the result of that. And just watching some of the behind the scenes features, it didn't seem like George Romero ever really considered Martin a vampire. It's just he was just a normal kid that maybe could have had a normal life under different circumstances.
Huh. Okay. So the old man is his grandfather, and his
It's
cousin.
actually his cousin. Uh,
Oh, okay.
I always imagined it was his grandfather too, but watching it this time, it's his cousin. And I think that might be left over from an idea that Romero originally had, where Martin was going to be a much older man. He was going to be around the same age as his cousin, Kuda, I think his name is.
Right.
So that might be why they're both cousins and not like it's not like a grandfather situation.
I mean, if you cast a younger guy, just call him the grandson. I don't know, but whatever. Yeah. So he's his cousin, and then
Mhm,
the Christina, the younger girl, is the second cousin, I guess,
mhm.
of Martin. So he was raised in a family where everybody was just constantly telling him like, "You're a vampire, like you are a vampire," and he's like, "Oh fuck, I'm a vampire." Like, so they've just been telling him that his whole life.
Yeah, at least his cousin has.
Oh,
But it's interesting because there's certain things that Martin buys into, and then there's certain things that he doesn't. You know, like he doesn't buy into the crosses and the garlic thing, and he tries to convince his cousin, look, you know, none of this works. There's no real magic, he
yeah,
says.
yeah,
But he does buy into the fact that he's 80 something years old.
right, right.
Or does he just say that? You know, does he really believe that? Or is that just something he's saying to Christina? I don't know. You know, maybe he's just
Mm.
making excuses for himself because he does these terrible things, and he wants to do them, but, you know, maybe telling himself he's a vampire makes him feel better. I don't know. It's all left a little ambiguous.
I like that though.
Hmm.
Like, have you ever seen Let's Scare Jessica to Death
No.
from the '70s?
Mm-mm.
Oh, Joe, you gotta see it. I feel like you would love it. Finally, a movie I can recommend to you. You have to watch this. It's from the early '70s, and it kind of is the same thing. It's like it leaves the audience like, is this in her head? Is this actually happening to her? Very similar soundtrack. Actually, they filmed it in Connecticut too, so a little connection to you and I. But great movie. But anyway, so yeah, so this movie reminded me a lot of that, where I'm just like, I don't think he's a vampire, but I could see maybe how like from certain angles they might convince the audience that he is. But yeah, the 84 years old thing, I was like, well, dude, let's hear about shit. And like, why do you act like like a young boy and you run like an 18-year-old boy from the 70s? You don't run like an 84-year-old man. I'm not saying like he would walk like that, but he would probably have a more confident stride, I'd imagine, after 84 years.
Yeah, or even more wisdom. Like
Yeah.
he is just this awkward kid. There's nothing to hint that he's led this long life.
Right. Dude, if you lived for 84 years and
Mhm.
you looked young, like you would, I feel like you would know everything. Like you
Yeah.
would just be so like suave and yeah.
Mhm.
So I lost a little bit of like, I don't know what's happening, but anyways. So yeah, so he's not a vampire, we don't think.
Yeah, I see that's the thing. I was thinking this movie easily could have been just another serial killer movie. You know, there were a bunch of them in the 70s, like Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, or
Hmm.
Maniac. But I really like the whole vampire thing. It just makes it stand out from those other serial killer movies. There's just something more creative and artsy and gothic about it.
Yeah, and it also just adds like a lore to everything because when the cousin, the older cousin or whatever's talking about like there's three vampires in our family and they're like looking through the book or whatever, she's like, oh shit, like they could have made spin-off movies or like
Mhm.
Larry, like his other cousin or whatever. So
Yeah.
like that, I like that they didn't even go too deep into it, so it leaves
Mhm.
even that ambiguous. You're like, oh shit. So yeah,
Mhm.
that was cool.
And again, those little moments where he's having these kind of delusions about being a very, you know, romantic vampire, those are my absolute favorite scenes in the movie. It makes me wish that Romero did more black and white movies because I think they're really beautifully shot. And actually, Romero did consider making this whole movie in black and white. I think that might have been an issue with the distributor. They didn't want to do a black and white movie. But I'm actually glad he didn't shoot the whole movie in black and white because it has this great juxtaposition. One moment we're in like this grindhouse 70s movie, and the next moment we look like we're in a classic vampire movie.
Mm. Yeah, I like that a lot too. And yeah, he looks so like it looked like the 50s. Like his hair looked like young and combed over and stuff like that. So that was the only thing that was making me think like maybe because that looked like it was a long time ago, right? All those scenes.
Yeah, I mean, but he's an unreliable narrator,
Yeah.
so I think we have to take that as just his delusions.
Okay. Yeah. So it's a lot like American Psycho, or American Psycho's a lot like this because, yeah, like he says certain things, and you're like, wait, is this real? Is this actually happening? And you genuinely never do know. And he's narrating it. He's doing the VO or whatever. So you have to you assume to trust him, but yeah, you're right.
Mhm.
I don't trust Martin anymore. I don't know. Yeah, American Psycho, Dexter, those are the two big ones that I got from this, especially all of the close-up cutting, like Dexter in the opening of have you ever seen Dexter?
I actually haven't.
Oh, okay. So yeah, the intro of the show is like him cutting fruit, but it looks like it's a head or whatever. And
Mhm.
this with the celery, and especially in this, it reminded me a lot of like, oh, so he's like slicing through celery, or the finger trap thing with the oh yeah, celery again. So yeah, little things that really reminded me. Like Dexter probably pulled a lot from this.
Hmm.
Yeah, and American Psycho, I think. I don't know. But actually, so a little bit of trivia for you. Not it's not that interesting, but the guy that played the grandfather, Lincoln Mazel. Do you know anything about him?
Not much. I know he was involved in a Romero movie that actually, it's not even a movie, but a project that just got released called The Amusement Park, I believe.
Oh yeah, you're right. Released in 2019. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like I don't know too many details about it. I think it was done as like a public service announcement or something, but because it's George Romero and it was just recently discovered, it's kind of a big deal. I'm curious to see it.
Ooh, yeah, that's cool. I didn't know about that.
Mhm.
Damn, yeah, I'm reading about it right now. When I was filmed in 1973. Yeah, that's cool.
Mhm.
No, the thing that I found interesting about him is he died in 2009.
Wow.
Dude, he was 106.
He might have been a vampire.
Seriously, like seriously, dude. Because like he was born in 1901, so he was like 74 whenever when this movie came out. And you're like, oh, this guy's definitely dead. And then he died in 2009. I thought that was insane.
Something I love about Romero's early movies, especially, is that there's so many familiar faces, both in front of the camera and behind it. When I was watching the credits, the DP is Michael Gornick, and he directed
Hmm.
Creepshow 2, which we talked about recently.
Ah,
Of course, we have Tom Savini here.
I know. Like real, like acting, like really acting.
Yeah. And you know what? I think the acting, for a really low budget 70s grindhouse movie, I think the acting is pretty good, especially a lot of these people aren't known for being actors like Savini, and even George Romero has a little role as a priest later, and I think
Hmm.
he's really good.
I know. When I saw that too, I was like, I looked it up. I was like, is that him? And I was buying it. I thought he was pretty cool as the priest. Yeah. No, you're right though. I don't understand. I mean, I guess it's just the distribution because otherwise, this is a good movie. Like people should have seen this. I feel like I don't. It sucks that it just went under the radar. I'd never even heard of it until you brought it up.
Yeah, apparently it got some good reviews. It premiered at the Cannes Film Festival and had some good notices, but just sort of faded into obscurity. But hopefully this new release, even though it isn't widely available, will get the horror community talking again, at least.
Well, I wanted to ask you too, since you watched the 4K version,
Mhm.
were all of like the film specs was that all like taken out?
No, it's still a pretty grimy movie. This is a 16 millimeter movie, so it has that, Texas Chainsaw Massacre look to it,
Mm-hmm.
but there's just nothing you can do about that. And you wouldn't want to. I think you want to preserve the character of this movie. That grainy look is just part of the experience. So it's a nice image. I'm sure it's much better than the DVD I lent you, but this is still gonna look like a grindhouse movie no matter what.
Well, it's funny you say that because I used to work for a job where they would do remasters of like, Citizen Kane or stuff like that. And what they would have to do is literally go frame by frame and then remove lines or specs or all that stuff. So they do that for like like Casablanca and Gone with the Wind, like stuff like that. They will
Mhm.
do that. They'll actually do stuff like that.
Yeah, the remastering process really fascinates me. I don't know much about it, but I love when, they have these special features that go over that on some of these discs.
Oh,
But sometimes they can clean up a movie too much.
right.
They can like digitally scrub it and stuff. But for a movie like this, shot on 16 millimeter, you don't want it to look like a brand new movie that was shot digitally.
I totally agree. No, seriously, yeah, like Halloween too. Like even if they brighten it up a little bit, like it loses some of the cool appeal of like when he comes out of the shadows and stuff. Like it can look a little too good sometimes.
Yeah.
Also, I guess like what's the point of the movie? Like why is Martin there? Why is he like having sex with housewives? Like is it just to follow him and see like this is what it's like to potentially hang out with a vampire? Like what do you think is like the point?
Hmm. Well, George Romero, he always has some kind of social commentary running in his movies. It's usually very subtle. Actually, in some of his later movies, it's not subtle at all. But in his early good movies, he usually has some subtle commentaries going. And I almost feel like this is taking a shot at kind of fundamentalism and religion in general. Like there's the one scene in the church where the church is just like kind of asking for people's money,
Right.
and I think Romero is taking some subtle shots at religion.
I think you're 100% right because he really is like nailing that over the head, especially with that exorcist scene or the exorcism scene. Like
Hmm.
that felt, I don't know, like it just felt like it was fake.
Yeah.
I don't know, just it didn't. And then Martin just gets up and walks out like nothing happens, and I was just like, yeah,
Yeah, I think there's a lot of kind of subtle dark comedy in this movie too, like
mm-hmm,
even when he, attacks these women, that's kind of, it's dark and brutal, but the awkwardness of it is not like what we usually see in movies, and it almost makes
no,
it a little funny. And that exorcism scene, they actually mention the movie The
right.
Exorcist in the scene before, and then we get an exorcism scene in this movie, and it's just kind of like lame and pathetic.
Right, yeah, because it's supposed to be like real, like this is what it would really look like. Yeah, and he got to do it in Pittsburgh again, his home,
Mhm.
and then yeah, so the actor, the guy who plays Martin, I guess this was his first movie. That I love when they're like now introducing like blah blah blah, like they're so proud.
Mhm.
But that's pretty crazy that he was in his late 20s, never acted before, and got the leading role in a George Romero film. I mean, I think that's pretty. They must have really impressed him.
Yeah, and there's some interviews on the disc with him today, and it's kind of sad. He really thought this was going to be a launching pad for his career,
Yeah.
and he didn't go on to do much. But fun fact, he actually played the zombie in the Father's Day segment of Creepshow.
Oh, there you go. So he got to work with Romero again. Oh, and Day of the Dead. He was in that too. Oh, and Dawn of the Dead.
Yeah, that's what I
Oh,
mean. Like his early movies, it's just like a theater troupe. It's great.
yeah. Oh, okay. That's pretty cool. Yeah. Well, all right. I guess another question I have then about just why. So why did he tell that housewife that he was sleeping with that he was a virgin? Or do you think that was real, or do you think he just said that to her so that she'd do it with him? Like,
I actually took that, at face value, or, at least he probably hasn't had any willing partners. So
huh?
I kind of took that as him just being brutally honest.
Oh, God. Yeah, I know. Because we don't, yeah, we have no reason to actually believe he's a vampire. We never see vampire teeth. The sun doesn't affect him. I mean, nothing shows us he's a vampire. So, yeah, I don't think he is. I think he's just a really weird dude.
Mhm.
Also found out that George A. Romero edited this, which is just like, this guy did everything. Wrote, directed, edited, acted. Like, I don't know. It's really impressive. And for no money, $250,000.
Yeah. I mean, that's why it's so much fun to talk about the guy. Like he really was so not Hollywood. He was a real maverick, and I think the whole crew, it was like 10 people.
Wow.
Mhm.
I mean, that's just like you would never hear that nowadays. Like, so, like some director writes, directs, edits. I mean, I don't know. The editing thing blows me away because that takes a lot of work and it's a very specific skill. Like, you've been working on videos recently.
Mhm.
It's just like, I don't know, it blows my mind for him to do for so little money too. Like, you could tell he's a really passionate director, really passionate filmmaker.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's too bad he didn't get to tell more of the stories he wanted to tell. I've probably gotten into this in other Romero episodes, but, the only, funding he can get towards the end of his career was to make more movies with dead in the title, and I think he had a lot more potential than just that.
Oh God, yeah. I mean, I don't think I've seen The Crazies. I'd really like to because
Mhm.
I think I saw the remake, but I want to see more of his movies, especially more of his early stuff.
Yeah, The Crazies, I actually like the remake. It's not one of my favorite Romero movies. I think what he was trying to do with The Crazies, I feel like he did better in Night of the Living Dead.
Hmm.
But he's got some interesting ones that we haven't talked about. We still need to talk about Day of the Dead. And
Right.
The Dark Half is pretty cool. That's a Stephen King story.
Okay. So yeah. So he's done quite a bit with Stephen King, then Creepshow and that.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. See, I love this. God damn it, dude. This next decade's gonna be rough, man. We're gonna lose like everybody we like. You
Oh,
know.
man.
Ugh.
Put John Carpenter in a bubble.
Oh, yeah, dude. Not. Nah, we're getting there for with him. Well, I don't know. Do you have any last minute thoughts on Martin before we wrap up here?
This was just really fun to revisit. It's not one that I will probably rewatch like Dawn of the Dead or Creepshow. It's not really that kind of movie. When we were talking about this last week, I said, I need to know you to recommend this movie. I wouldn't just tell
Right.
anybody you need to watch Martin. It's
Right.
it's a movie for a certain audience, and I'm just really glad you dug it.
Dude, I really did. And actually, before we wrap up, we didn't even talk about the ending. Like
Hmm.
the huge out of nowhere ending. I don't know. I feel like obviously this is kind of a trope of 70s movies to just end on a downer. You're just like, God, like that was huge in the 70s. But this one, yeah, spoiler alert, Martin just gets killed by his cousin, the old man, out of nowhere. He just decides, like, yeah, I'm just gonna fucking kill him when he's sleeping. Like, I don't care. And he just did it. I mean, damn, man.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a gut punch too. He's just in bed and he wakes up and his cousin is standing over him with a stake and a hammer and just lays into him.
Oh my God. And he's like not even trying to be quiet about it. He's like, I don't like you. You're the devil. You're a Nosferatu. And he's just like stabbing him. He's like, oh, and he gets up like, and that's it. That's the end. And then you get that extremely 70s red paint blood that doesn't look anything like blood. And, you know, that was it. It was sad. Oh, and then you kind of get a little nod to Night of the Living Dead where they're like talking about him because they call him the Count on that radio station.
Hmm.
And then they show like the aftermath of what happens after he's dead. And everybody's like, where's the Count? Where's the Count? Like, I loved that. That was sick.
I mean, the 70s was just such a glorious time for movies. I mean, like, when was the last time you ever saw a movie with an ending like that? Maybe The Mist. That's it. But
Right.
besides that, I mean, just like pitch black.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, a lot of movies like that ended in the 70s like that, though, just, on a huge downer, And
Yeah.
yeah, you really don't see that anymore.
Hmm.
And I think, and that was an answer to like the 60s where everything, or like the 50s and 60s where it's just like, the guy grabs the girl, they ride off into the sunset. They're like, you know what? We're going to make you fucking miserable when you walk
Yeah.
out of the theater.
Yeah. And then really just a few years later, you would see very little of that in the 80s.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, just like a pendulum. It swings back and forth, I guess.
Hmm.
Videodrome is my biggest one where I'm just like, what? No way! Like, I won't spoil that now, but the ending of that really surprised me and made me sad.
Hmm.
But yeah, great movie. I really, I hope you're right with this new 4K re-release. I'm hoping it gets new attention. It literally came out a week ago, so hopefully people check it out because it's a really good movie. And if you like George A. Romero, if you like vampire movies, if you like 70s movies, it's like it's great. It's such a cool score too. I loved it.
Yeah, same. Someone did make this score. Like, I would have thought it was just kind of assembled from like library music, like Romero did, Night of the Living Dead and
Hmm.
Dawn of the Dead. And maybe that's how this was assembled too. But yeah, I don't really know the story behind the music, but I really love it.
Dude, I'm telling you, Joe, let's scare Jessica to death. You will love it. I'm telling you, you're going to love it.
Okay, I'll mark it down.
All right, well, everybody, thank you very much for listening into our discussion on Martin today. If you haven't had a chance, we released an episode last week, which was called Cube. So you can check that out, and we will see you all next week with Poltergeist 2. Thanks again, Joe.
Thank you.